Now we're going to hear from Dr. Betty Adams. Her topic will be higher education, a different model. I've had the pleasure of working with Dr. Adams for the last couple of years when I took my position at the Riverstone Energy Center. It's been a pleasure working with the Higher Education Center here. They have wonderful programs here. Hopefully you've been on the tours and seen the wonderful facilities and the programs that they have here. She's going to be talking today about some of those things. Dr. Betty Adams is from South Boston, Virginia, native, who has happily returned home here to Halifax County. Dr. Adams left the county to follow her career opportunities in North Carolina shortly after graduating from Radford University in 1981 with a Bachelor of Science degree. Dr. Adams continued her academic pursuits in North Carolina, earning a Master of Business Administration degree in 1988 at East Carolina University and a Doctorate of Education degree in 2002 from North Carolina State University in Raleigh. Let's welcome Dr. Betty Adams. Thank you.
We've heard two presentations now that have really focused on some good information, some hard data. I'm getting ready to flip the switch a little bit and talk in more softer terms of some ideas and concepts. It has been a joy for me to come back home and serve as the executive director of the Southern Virginia Higher Ed Center. And it has been the most rewarding and challenging job of my life. Now, for those of you who are in similar leadership positions, one of the biggest challenges that I find is, as the leader, you're responsible for seeing the big picture and guiding the ship and having the vision. Well, it's hard to do that. And it's hard to find the time to think about things. And I guess one way to express it is it's hard to drain the swamp when you're up to your neck in alligators. So I want to talk about education, not just higher education, but I want to talk about education in general. And how I think that Scott said economic development is a team sport. I see education as a team sport. So let's take a look at what I'm talking about. Now, the first thing I want to do is refer back to a gentleman, Dr. Ed Wheatley, who was chairman of the Department of Marketing at East Carolina University when I was an MBA student. And he was a mentor to me. And he was highly sought after for consulting work. And he was good enough to bring me into the fold and let me participate. And I learned so much from watching Dr. Wheatley and listening to Dr. Wheatley. And he got brought in on so many occasions to tell businesses what they weren't doing correctly. So it sometimes put him in something of an adversarial position. So he always started out by saying, well, Socrates was a wise man. He gave people advice. They poisoned him. Okay? So I don't want to get poisoned. And I'm not here saying that I have all the answers. In fact, the older I get, the more I realize I don't have any answers. But I got lots of questions. And there are people out there like you, young people, who can answer those questions. So, I want to get your feedback. If you are on Twitter, if you tweet, and I don't do that, and I should, I suppose, I would love to hear your feedback on what you hear today. And I'm going to be floating to you something, a model, it's not really a finished model, but an idea, a concept that I really haven't shared out loud except with my staff. And it's something that's kind of been, percolating in my mind. And when I have some time to think about big picture, these are the types of things we think about. So I want to hear your feedback. Okay, I'm going to talk about, and you've already heard our previous speakers talk about the nexus between education and manufacturing. And in my opinion, there's some parallels, really strong parallels between manufacturing and education. In fact, we have something of a past, we educators and manufacturers. And I believe we have a future, too, and can learn from one another. If you think about it, both educators and manufacturers are struggling right now with global competition. how to incorporate technology into our business models. How do we become and stay relevant in the 21st century? Another big parallel that we share between education and manufacturing is the fact that, particularly with our public school systems, that we are based on an industrial model of education. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. We also are both having to deal with skills gaps. So our manufacturers have jobs, but they don't have the people to fill the jobs. Well, isn't that our job as educators to get people ready to fill those jobs? So we share that too. So education has been around longer than manufacturing, and it has evolved quite a bit. And so the purpose of education, and we can't point really one thing to it, if you look at from the very beginning of time, education was really based on how do we survive? How do we feed ourselves? How do we clothe ourselves? Teaching our children how to survive. And then when the United States got started, it was about how do we continue accepting and learning and practicing our religious beliefs, how to read the Bible, and then how to live in a democracy, and then how to assimilate immigrants, and then how do we prepare workers for the industrial age. And that takes us to the industrial model. And we heard Scott talk a little bit about that, but the industrial model, and many educators think that this is anathema. That means that's not good. and I will say, because, I guess when I was coming along, I benefited from the industrial model. I fit well into that model, but I realized now not everybody does. And I think so. It had its place. I think we may now be ready to make some changes that mirror what manufacturers are changing now as well. But it looked at education as mass production, and it treated students as the raw products. But it didn't make any distinguishing. It didn't distinguish between the differences of students. Everybody was treated the same. And the public schools were primarily a vehicle for training workers, teaching them specialized tasks based on memorization and testing and completing boxes and graduating at certain standards. And today we still see some of that. And if you think back when I was in school, and if you're at the Halifax County High School, okay, my high school was the middle school. So that's where I graduated. So you probably sat in some of the same seats that I sat in, and my mother, and my father, and my brother, and my sister. So, but if you think about what schools looked like back then, when they were built, when I was a teenager or a kid, they looked like industries. It even reflected the architecture. So again, some folks, will tell you that that's not good, that's what's wrong with education. And I would agree that we're ready to make some changes. I think we can learn from what manufacturing is doing now with these concepts: lean manufacturing, vertical integration, and supply chain management. So if you think about the problems that we have in education are not unlike some of the problems that you see in the manufacturing process. Rework is a problem in manufacturing. Somebody from manufacturing, tell me, what does that mean? What is rework? Yes?
Have to remake or repair a part that's out of polish.
That's right, and that's not good. Why? That's right. What is the parallel concept in education? What is an example of rework in education? Remediation. And you heard one of our speakers talk about that. Production delays. Production delays. What's a production delay? Anything that stops the process and you're not getting product to the end of the line to get to the customer on time. In colleges and schools, what's a production delay? What do you think a production delay might be? Exactly, taking 7 years to graduate. And I realize that for some people, if you work, that may take you that long. But certainly in some cases, it takes our students much longer to complete than it should. and cost overruns. You know, you have a certain budget, you're expected to, the manufacturing process is expected to cost a certain amount. You have a certain amount budgeted for the raw materials. And if you don't meet that budget, then you have cost overruns, and that's not good because the manager, the plant manager doesn't get a bonus, or you don't get a bonus. So what is a cost overrun in education? You guys need to take note of this. You guys are probably dealing with something right now. How about the debt that our students are having to take on to pay for their college? The cost of education is exorbitant. So we share these things with manufacturing. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to talk about supply chain management, vertical integration, and relate them to education. So supply chain, what is a supply chain? It's a system of organizations, of people, of resources, of information involved in moving a product from service, from supplier to customer. And this is a little YouTube video.
I was already familiar with my role as a customer, but before setting off, I wanted to familiarize myself with the individual links that make up the global supply chain. What I discovered is that a supply chain is a cycle, but if you had to pick a logical place to begin, it would be marketing. Prior to anything being produced, it is in a company's best interest to predict the level of demand. This is achieved by conducting research which helps identify potential markets and forecast projected sales. Once markets are identified and demand is established, the product design phase begins. At this time, the specifications and materials required for efficient and cost-effective production are decided upon. After a prototype is designed and tested, it is time to secure suppliers who provide the raw materials and components that will be used to create the finished product. Manufacturing is the next process. Production lines are developed to transform the raw materials and assemble the components into a finished good that can be sold to customers. Manufacturers must then get their product to market with the help of logistics. Logistics entails the planning, coordination, and execution required for distribution to the customer. Depending on the product, a customer could be a wholesaler, a retailer, or a consumer like me. But the supply chain doesn't end there. Sometimes it's necessary for products to flow back up the supply chain, as is the case with returns, repairs, and recycling. This process is known as reverse logistics. Reverse logistics also provides data and feedback that manufacturers can use to make improvements in their products, which brings us back to the beginning of the supply chain.
So, supply chain management involves managing that system of linkages, okay? And in order to do that, we have to have a shared vision about what it is we're trying to accomplish. What is the product that we're trying to produce? And how can we work together? How can we collaborate together to make that happen? So, skip that. So think about supply chain. Every product that gets to market, and yes, I'm talking about students as being products, and it really gets on people's nerves sometimes. But every product that gets to market is the cumulative effort of many organizations. Most organizations have only paid attention to what was happening within their four walls. This is manufacturing I'm talking about now, really. Few really understood or appreciated the entire chain of activities involved in the supply chain. And the result has been disjointed and ineffective supply chains. So, what has manufacturing done? Well, they have invested in supply chain management and doing a better job of maintaining those relationships. Lean manufacturing is something that we hear a lot about, and that involves creating more value for customers using fewer resources. And when you manage your supply chain, you're going to do that. So vertical integration is another example, and I'm going to call on one of the manufacturers in the audience to give us an example, but vertical integration involves looking at that supply chain and combining, taking some of those pieces, some of those links, and combining them, the stages of production that would normally be done separately. So can somebody give us an example of what vertical integration, an example of vertical integration in industry? Yes.
A machine shop produces the part and then sends the part to a heat treat.
Okay.
For final heat treat.
Okay. Think about the automotive companies. Many of those companies will own tire companies. They will own the company that, the group that makes the frames and the group that makes the engines, all under one company. So what I want to throw out there today, my big idea, is should we not be looking at vertically integrated education? Are we not part of a system, a supply chain? And should we not be working together rather than as separate entities? And if you think about the history of education, each of our 3 cornerstone pieces, if you will, of education grew up separately. And if you think about it, we're all competing for the same dollars. When it comes down to budget time, the community colleges are competing with the K through 12, with the 4-year universities for the same pot of money. So wouldn't it be better if we were all together, working together as one system rather than separate systems? I think so. And I think that with the vertical integration of education, we begin to accept that, we are part of a system. And what are we supplying? What is our educational supply chain supplying?
Product for the student.
Say again?
Product for the student.
Okay, product for the students. Who else are our customers, though? Employers, absolutely. Who else? Our society. Are we not also producing good citizens? But absolutely, manufacturers are part of the mix. They're part of the customer. So what I have been thinking for a long time is that we spend so much money on K through 12, on the 2-year community colleges and technical schools, on our 4-year universities, and we're all competing against one another, it seems. Wouldn't it be better if we were all on the same team? Now, what that looks like, I don't have a clue. Like, remember I said I have the questions, no answers. So this is a question that I throw out to you, and I think when people, are young, that's when we take a look at how do these young people learn best? What learning style fits them? And where are their particular interests and predilections? And that's when we start building that foundation. We also need to, engage our customers in what are the types of finished products that we need. We've already heard that there's a skills gap in advanced manufacturing. We know that, so we need to do the work to determine, what are the end products, what are the skills necessary, and how do we, move through that system, beginning with K through 12, building the foundation, determining where their interests are, and then moving them through that career pipeline. They may leave after high school, although the data show that more and more, a good paying job requires high school plus some technical degree. But I'm not suggesting that all students need to go through that entire pipeline, but we should all take ownership of it.